Louisiana law.
The Confederate flag is history in Mississippi. With a stroke of a pen, the governor has accomplished what many have failed to do for years: remove the Confederate emblem from the state flag. Federal lawsuits, boycotts, voter referendums, even a Supreme Court case all fell short. But in the wake of George Floyd's death and this country's reality check on racism, Mississippi becomes the last state to remove the symbol. Nowhere to go.
We need help, and we're going to need it soon.
A housing crisis in America made even worse by the pandemic. In New Orleans, tenants, landlords, and the city are all running out of options. And as social safety nets begin to time out, a look at the catch-22 and what's being done to help. Record-breaking rise. COVID-19 infections increasing in more than 30 states, with California shattering its latest mark, more than 8,000 cases in just 24 hours. Los Angeles once again closing its beaches. Florida's dangerous surge. Masks become mandatory in some major cities. And as the issue remains a political lightning rod, tonight the research on how masks work to protect us. The nation's top health experts testify on Capitol Hill, pleading with Americans and reluctant leaders to wear them. Accused of giving up. In his first news conference in months, former Vice President Biden slams President Trump, saying our wartime president has surrendered, telling a reporter he can't wait to compare cognitive abilities with the president. Keeping us out. While COVID cases are rising in many states, many European countries are bouncing back, reopening, but not to Americans. Young voices. The 11-year-old protesters' plea as police in riot gear closed in. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. For decades, systemic disparities in this country have festered, often ignored. But this pandemic has exposed all that. Many of the ailments that Band-Aids failed to heal, problems that disproportionately affect poor and vulnerable communities of color, like access to health care, food, and most recently, America's housing crisis. An increasing number of renters across the country now face some grim realities as emergency eviction moratoriums run out and housing courts reopen. For the unemployed, the up to $600 a week CARES Act unemployment checks, they run out at the end of July. As a result, tonight on this, the final day of June, millions of Americans are now in limbo as they struggle to maintain a roof over their head. In Louisiana, a moratorium on evictions ended June 15th. Arcana Whitworth went to New Orleans, where residents have long been grappling with a housing crisis way before COVID-19.
I just want people to know that it's actually happening, that this is real life. Like, people are actually getting kicked out in the street.
Families in the Big Easy are facing impossibly difficult decisions as this pandemic enters its 5th month.
If they give you food stamps and you buy food.
Right. That doesn't, you have nowhere to put the food.
Shankaya Phillips lives in an apartment that she says the ceilings have always been leaking, but it's home. She has a 6 and 11-year-old and has been out of work for nearly 3 months since the clothing store she worked at closed. And now she has to worry about eviction every day.
Where do you get help from? Where do you turn to when you can't turn to a shelter anymore? When you can't, the home you're living in and you can't afford. You have nobody to look up to, no family members. It's scary.
A new estimate found that she is one of about 28 million Americans at risk of eviction, as this COVID-fueled recession is creating economic havoc across the country.
Here in New Orleans, the eviction rate is twice the national average. A study found last year that in some neighborhoods, it's even 4 times higher.
Now with unemployment 4 times higher than before the pandemic in New Orleans and the federal boost in unemployment benefits expiring at the end of July, the Louisiana Fair Housing Department fears the city is on a collision course.
Folks here know what's coming down the pike. We unfortunately have had more than our share of experience dealing with disasters and governmental failures.
Kashana Hill and her staff are working tirelessly to keep people in their homes. 53-year-old lawyer Winfield is one of them.
You know, there's a certain comfort in having this little place. I can't imagine being without it.
Southeast Louisiana Legal Services has seen a 100% increase in their eviction cases, and 41% of Louisiana renters say they didn't think they could make June rent.
This ongoing crisis was really not treated as a crisis. Now it's being pushed to the level where it must be treated as a crisis because of the pandemic.
Housing rights advocates fear what's coming next.
We're really concerned that we're going to see an avalanche of evictions as the courts open back up.
And landlords are also hurting.
I think it's going to kill them, and I think it's going to kill the city.
Kim Valine has been a landlord for nearly 20 years. She's never once had to evict someone until now.
I'm not a bad guy, and I really like my tenants and take care of my property. But you've got to understand that, certain people are taking advantage of the situation.
She's currently in the process of trying to remove a tenant who she says has not paid rent and has an illegal pit bull. She wasn't able to take any action until the moratorium on evictions expired. In the end, she anticipates losing $15,000, and she still has to pay her mortgage, property taxes, and insurance. Impending evictions have the city on edge, and health leaders are taking notice.
Every economic impact has a public health impact, and so certainly putting more people out of their homes would be devastating.
A problem New Orleans Health Department director has long been trying to solve and telling anyone who will listen.
We need help, and we're going to need it soon.
For so many mothers like Phillips, the dream is simple.
I want to raise my kids with a nice little fence in the front yard and where my dog can run around and not have to worry about them getting shot.
But right now, it's out of reach.
I mean, it makes you want to leave the city of New Orleans, but who wants to leave a place they love?
Kana Whitworth, ABC News, New Orleans.
Such difficult circumstances. Our thanks to Kana for that report. As 35 states see an increase in cases of coronavirus, Dr. Anthony Fauci has a new warning that the U.S. could be on track to see 100,000 cases each day, putting, quote, the entire country at risk. In California, the governor says that his state will be one of the latest to reverse course. Our Matt Gutman continues to track this crisis.
Tonight in California, the first state to shut down and one of the last to reopen, COVID-19 exploding. Nearly 250,000 cases, and the governor with a stern warning.
If you're not going to stay home and you're not going to wear masks in public, we have to enforce, and we will.
The situation so dire that New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, which have beaten back COVID after tens of thousands of deaths, now slapping a 14-day quarantine on visitors from California and a growing list of 15 other states where the virus is surging. With the nation notching 40,000 new cases a day, Dr. Anthony Fauci today warning those case numbers could easily double.
I would not be surprised if we go up to 100,000 a day if this does not turn around, and so I am very concerned. I think it's important to tell you and the American public that I'm very concerned because it could get very bad.
It is bad in California's farm belt of Imperial County. So overwhelmed, they've medevaced over 500 patients out of the county. And outside that hospital, a tent to handle the surge of patients. Morgues have backed up, and now the county is ordering refrigerated trucks for the dead. And nearby Riverside County, 99% of the ICUs full.
We're seeing a large number of cases coming in where multiple family members are infected.
Los Angeles County with over 100,000 cases alone, closing beaches and banning fireworks over the 4th of July weekend. 51-year-old Tommy Macias of California sharing on Facebook that he was diagnosed with COVID after going to a barbecue. Because of my stupidity, I put my mom and sisters and my family's health in jeopardy. This has been a very painful experience. His family says he was a diabetic and had been careful wearing masks and social distancing for months. But Tommy Macias passed away the day he went to the hospital.
It was absolutely shocking. I wasn't in the room when my mom got the call. I heard her cry out. I still don't want to believe it.
With the virus rising in 35 states, 17 states either pausing or rolling back reopenings. In Arizona, deaths climbing. Our Kaylee Hartung with paramedics on COVID calls in Mesa. Today, a 40-year-old patient with trouble breathing. His mother rushing to see him before he's taken to the hospital.
I just came so I could, because, we can't see them. We can't talk, so, well, anyway, I just wanted to see him. That's all.
Just such heartbreaking stories. And Matt joins us now from a testing site at Dodger Stadium. Matt, California was, of course, the first state to issue stay-at-home orders and even bragged about the success of their measures. You spoke with the governor then, and now he says he wants to toggle back. What will that look like, and will that be enough to help the overwhelmed hospitals that you've been reporting from?
You know, we have seen some of the most harsh restrictions here in California in recent months, and it seems that the governor is going to reimpose them. He's already reimposed stay-at-home orders in 7 counties. At some point, it might apply to the rest of the state. Now, in all fairness, he did say back in April, it is very unlikely that the school year is going to start here, that these restrictions, he's going to try to roll back on them and reopen as much as he can, but he didn't know how long that would last. Now, the percentage rise here in California has been steady but incremental. The question is, what is the tipping point? Is there a point beyond which the capacity in hospitals will not be able to handle incoming patients? We have not reached that yet, but obviously that is a massive concern when you're talking about a state that has a population that's higher than that of Canada.
Yeah, and
Lindsay.
the schools reopening, another big issue there as well. Okay, Matt Gutman, thanks so much for your reporting. And now to Florida, where several major cities there have made mask wearing mandatory, with cases in the state topping 150,000. Tonight, a look at the difference that masks can make. ABC's Victor Akendo has more.
As the Sunshine State surpasses 150,000 coronavirus cases and counting, local leaders are enacting new measures desperate to slow the spread. Effective today, masks are mandatory on Miami Beach at all times, with few exceptions.
Just wear the darn mask.
If you don't wear one, you face a $50 fine.
If this mask ordinance doesn't work, what's next?
Well, you know, there's not a lot of tools left in the kit for us. I think everybody declared a victory too early.
Florida's governor said his state was a success story just last month.
You got a lot of people in your profession who waxed poetically for weeks and weeks about how Florida was going to be just like New York. Wait 2 weeks, Florida's going to be next. Just like Italy, wait 2 weeks. Well, hell, we're 8 weeks away from that, and it hasn't happened.
That was then, but now cases and hospitalizations are on the rise, and there are calls for a statewide mask mandate, something the governor has resisted. Studies have shown that the virus may spread by even just talking. Some research noting people can release up to 10 times more particles through speech than a cough.
Stay healthy.
This demonstration shows how wearing a mask can reduce spread by some estimates up to 50%.
Stay healthy.
For now, Florida's mask regulations vary from city to city. In Jacksonville, where Ernst Bell lost his father to COVID-19, a new mandate was enacted this week. He has this message for people who are not taking mask recommendations seriously.
If the people that, we saw were wearing masks, he'd probably still be alive.
Some harsh words there for those who are still refusing to wear a mask. And Victor joins us now from Miami Beach. So, Victor, how seriously are people taking it? I mean, $50 fine for not wearing a mask seems like perhaps enough of a deterrent. But will it be enforced?
Well, Lindsay, I did ask the mayor of Miami Beach about enforcement, and he tells me that it's up to Miami Beach police. Now, we've been out here on iconic Ocean Drive for about an hour now. We've seen a lot of people with masks, just not necessarily wearing them, and I can tell you we haven't seen any enforcement out here either. They definitely want to key in on people in groups, not social distancing. The way the mayor put it, there are just not a lot of tools left in the kit. Lindsay?
All right, Victor Akendo, thanks so much. And now to the race for the White House, where today Joe Biden blasted President Trump for his response to the pandemic. The former vice president charges that Trump has squandered the sacrifices made by Americans while criticizing the president for turning wearing a mask into a political statement as COVID cases continue to rise. And for the first time in months, Biden also took questions from the press. ABC's Mary Bruce was there and has this story.
Joe Biden today accused President Trump of abandoning the country he leads in the midst of this growing crisis.
Donald Trump failed us.
Biden says Trump is in retreat.
And it seems like our wartime president has surrendered, waved the white flag, and left the battlefield. We can't continue half wearing masks and half rejecting science. We can't continue half with a plan and half just hoping for the best.
The The president has barely mentioned the new surge in cases, and he still refuses to wear a mask in public, even as his own vice president and top Republicans are now urging Americans to wear them. His allies on Fox News joining in.
I think they work. And I said, especially if I wear a mask and it opens up baseball, concerts, NFL football, I'd rather wear the mask and go to the game.
If the president wore one, it would just set a good example. He'd be a good role model.
Today, I asked Biden what he would tell Americans.
The response to this pandemic has become very politicized. Even wearing a mask has become political. If elected, how are you going to get Americans on the same page?
I think we have to start appealing to the better side of human nature by pointing out that that mask is not so much to protect me, it's to protect you against me. It's to protect other people. And it's called patriotism. It's called responsibility.
Mary Bruce joins us now. And Mary, Biden seems to be stepping up his attacks on the president in recent days. So what's he saying about how he'll approach campaigning going forward in the midst of this pandemic?
Well, Lindsay, one thing is clear, and that is that Joe Biden is not going to be holding any big campaign rallies. He said that he wishes he could be out meeting with voters. He regrets not being able to make that connection right now. But for the sake of the common good, it's simply not realistic at this current moment. That, of course, puts Biden in a stark contrast with President Trump, who has been out there on the campaign trail and is planning to mark the 4th of July next week at Mount Rushmore with thousands of people and no social distancing. Looking ahead, it is very clear that Biden is going to continue to try and draw sharp contrasts with the president and really present this split screen, constantly hammering away at how he would be leading differently in this pandemic, how he would be handling this moment if he were president. It is clear that he is looking forward, though, to having those debates with President Trump. He said he can hardly wait. And as for the VP pick, we can still expect that to come sometime early next month.
And this was, of course, the first time that Biden is taking questions from the press in months. What was it like there? And will Biden be doing more press briefings?
Well, in a word, it was bizarre. I have certainly never seen a campaign event like this. He was speaking just before a very small, limited group of reporters, all of us socially distanced. We had to have our temperatures checked before we went into the room, had to answer several health questions. And then we all sat there in those circles, making sure that we were the recommended 6 feet apart. It did seem, though, that Biden enjoyed taking questions from the press. It's the first time he's held a briefing like this in months. In fact, his team kept kind of telling him he had to wrap up. He took more and more questions, so I suspect perhaps we will be seeing more of these in the future.
I could imagine. Okay, Mary, thanks so much for your reporting. And staying in Washington, and the fallout over reports that Russia allegedly paid bounties to the Taliban to kill American service members in Afghanistan. Today, more members of Congress were briefed on the intelligence. But what did the White House and the president know and when? And should action be taken against Russia now? ABC Chief White House Correspondent Jonathan Karl has the latest.
Today, the White House refused to say whether President Trump received intelligence as part of his written presidential daily briefing that Russia offered bounty payments to the Taliban for killing American troops. The New York Times reported the information was presented to President Trump back in February.
So the PDB is a top secret document that is widely disseminated among government. I will never sit here and confirm or deny what is in a top secret document.
That prompted reporters to ask if the president actually reads the intelligence he's given.
The president does read, and he also consumes intelligence verbally. This president, I'll tell you, is the most informed person on planet Earth when it comes to the threats that we face.
Over the weekend, the president dismissed reports of Russian bounty payments as, quote, possibly another fabricated Russia hoax. But the administration has now conducted separate briefings on the intelligence for both Republicans and Democrats.
The president called this a hoax publicly. Nothing in the briefing that we have just received led me to believe it is a hoax.
Several Republicans emerged from their briefing, calling the information gravely serious.
America's adversaries should know, and they should have no doubt, that any targeting of U.S. forces by Russians, by anyone else, will face a very swift and deadly response.
That's a message the president himself has still not sent.
And Jonathan Karl joins us now. John, you mentioned those separate briefings from members of Congress from both parties. Any concern that national security information isn't being shared in a bipartisan manner?
Well, that certainly did raise some eyebrows. It's highly unusual to have intelligence briefings on really any matter, but particularly a sensitive matter like this, be done in a partisan manner. Now, that will change tomorrow, Lindsay. We are told that the so-called Gang of Eight, that includes the 4 top congressional leaders in the House and the Senate, bipartisan, and the 4 top leaders of the intelligence committees in the Senate and the House, will be here at the White House. That'll be 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans getting further briefed on this tomorrow.
And are members of Congress saying what should be done if these reports on Russia are accurate?
Well, you heard from Liz Cheney, one of the top Republican leaders in the House, saying that there absolutely must be consequences if these reports are accurate. But what's interesting is we have not heard anything similar from the president himself. He's actually been largely silent on this since we're invoking the idea of this being another Russia hoax over the weekend. And his press secretary held a very short briefing today, did not directly take a question on that or say what would happen. She did go on at some length at one point saying that the president has been very tough on Russia in the past, but nothing about what consequences there would be if this turns out to be true.
Okay, all right. Jonathan Karl from the White House. Thanks so much, John.
Thanks, Lindsay.
The head of the Marine Corps is also responding to the charge that Russia may have put a bounty on American service members in Afghanistan. ABC News Chief Global Affairs correspondent Martha Raddatz sat down with a Marine Corps Commandant General David Berger, asking him what the military knew about the potential threat.
I know you've spent time in Afghanistan. Can you tell us anything about what you might know or what you might have seen?
Nothing more than you know. Nothing more than I've read. You know my time there as well, but it's the first I'd heard of it. So I suppose, like you and I read about, they'll do the complete investigation and sort through all that, but I don't know anything more than that, honestly.
Is that the sort of thing that would surprise you?
Yes.
That the Russians were putting a bounty out on American troops?
If there was, I would think you would know that earlier than now. It doesn't mean it's impossible. And a lot, I suppose, that might have surprised me 10, 15 years ago, now doesn't, but I think we'll just wait for the investigation and see.
So does it surprise you that this might have happened based on your experience?
Would it surprise me? I would have to be, I'd have to probably understand more about the context to draw that conclusion. I would sure heck hope not.
But one of the things the Commandant stresses is that he wants the Marine Corps to continue to be a deterrent to places like Russia and China, no matter where they are in the world. Lindsay?
All right, thank you, Martha. And one of the most closely watched election showdowns is now over. Amy McGrath, a former Marine fighter pilot, will square off against Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell this November. This was after she was declared the winner against Charles Booker to become Kentucky's Democratic Senate nominee. Booker mounted an impressive late surge, securing key endorsements, but wasn't able to pull out the votes in the end. McGrath goes into the race against McConnell after raising more than $40 million. And when we come back, the armed homeowners waving their guns as protesters march by their home, they speak out why they say they did it. As Mississippi becomes the final state to remove the Confederate symbol from its flag, we speak with Robert W. Lee about the legacy of his distant relative and how he hopes the nation moves forward. But first, the European Union reopens its borders to visitors from 15 countries tomorrow. America is not on that list. How did the EU control their COVID cases so much better than we have?
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Your mom said, comb your hair. Your dad told you, smarten up. Your dog is judging you right now. And your best friend just called you crazy. We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. Now imagine getting your news like that. No bull, no spin, just give it to me straight. Straightforward news, straight to the heart of the story. ABC News, straightforward.
who was stealing from the biggest boy bands ever.
I was in the biggest band in the world, but I can't even afford my apartment.
He was robbing them blind. Now, what you don't know. The 2020 event, Friday at 9, 8 Central on ABC.
Welcome back. Algeria, Canada, Rwanda, and South Korea citizens from those 4 nations, along with 11 others, will be allowed to visit the European Union starting tomorrow. But Americans, they will not be due to our soaring cases. But before New York, New Orleans, and the other early hotspots inside the U.S. raged, there was Italy and also Spain. But now, while beaches in parts of California and Florida are once again shutting down, this was a scene in Barcelona. Now, how did the EU and U.S. fare so differently? Maggie Rulli files this report from France.
American Katie Gamby lives in France with her husband and their 3 little girls. They live in the city of Versailles, a short ride from Paris, and also home to Louis XIV's famously majestic castle and grounds. But when COVID hit, the country she now calls home and the city that attracts tens of millions of visitors every year became a shell of its former self.
It was pretty intense.
With Paris's most iconic and beloved sites shuttered. But after months of lockdown, France and the rest of Europe will start to welcome back some international travelers tomorrow. The Eiffel Tower reopening its doors just last week.
This is the iconic view of Paris. And for so many people around the world, the Eiffel Tower's reopening is a sign of hope.
But for Americans, these iconic European scenes that are on so many people's bucket lists will remain off limits for the foreseeable future. The EU announcing that for now, it will not allow U.S. travelers into the bloc.
The biggest difference in the U.S. is that we have this clash of messages where some political leaders are saying, get back to work, get back to your social life. There's nothing to worry about. While public health leaders are saying, this is serious, social distance, wear masks, and wash your hands. It doesn't work unless as a nation, we're all on the same page about what needs to be done.
The U.S. is seeing an uptick of infections in 32 of its states, while Europe has flattened its curve. 29 out of 31 countries saw an 83% drop in infections since April 9th. While Europe, like the U.S., had a slow and chaotic initial response to the pandemic, once the severity of the problem became apparent, many countries then reacted swiftly. On March 9th, Italy's prime minister announced a total shutdown, restricting all movements inside the country. France and Spain followed suit that same week, fining people for just being outside.
Even to go out jogging, I needed a note to go out, a signed note, timed note, even to go to the grocery store.
But while the U.S. imposed travel restrictions to and from the EU, 9 states imposed no stay-at-home orders. 6 states had orders that lasted less than a month. In contrast, full lockdowns in Italy, France, and Spain lasted about 2 months, and the countries slowly and cautiously eased out of them as their case numbers declined.
What you see across Europe is that they've been applying the public health approach to controlling this. They're identifying cases quickly, they're tracking them to see who's had contact, and they're making sure that everyone who's at risk is able to isolate or quarantine so they don't spread this infection. That's not been happening across the United States.
In France, President Macron showcased face masks, making it part of the nation's identity. While in the United States, President Trump has yet to publicly embrace wearing a face mask.
Would you want to go back to the U.S. right now? Honestly, no. And I'm not really going to put my kids in a place where that I know that they're at risk. So it's keeping us safe for as long as we can is kind of the priority.
But European officials' decision to leave Americans out of the tourist season is hitting home. Katie worked for a tour company in Paris.
This is like the nail in the coffin. 90% of our clientele were Americans.
Tourism accounts for about 10% of the EU's GDP and employs more than 11% of its population. They desperately need tourists, but with cases soaring stateside, Europe doesn't think Americans are worth the risk, and the priority remains keeping their case count low. Clusters popping up across the continent are a constant reminder that until there's a vaccine, the virus will continue to be a threat. Germany recently saw a spike with 1,500 new cases from a meatpacking plant, prompting the shutdown of 2 German counties. And in France, though the country reported only 280 new cases yesterday, fear still looms. I mean, what did you think when you got that text last night and there was an outbreak at your daughter's school?
It was panic again. It was definitely stress and panic. I mean, there's just so much we don't know that I'd rather just keep safe and be safe than sorry.
It's a delicate dance the European economy will have to navigate. Countries attempting to regain some of the business lost, while hospitals prepare for a second wave. As this tourist season kicks up, Europe is testing in real time if their success in containing the spread will last. Maggie Rulli, ABC News, Paris.
A delicate dance indeed, and our thanks to Maggie. We still have a lot to get to here on ABC News Prime. The video of the arrest of Elijah McClain and his haunting words, "I can't breathe," again sending people into the streets. But now word of a new investigation into the actions of several officers photographed near the site. We'll explain coming up. And the Paycheck Protection Program is set to end with billions left unused. Where will small businesses be able to turn next? But first, our tweet of the day. One word in repeat from the director of Florida's Division of Emergency Management: masks.
We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. No bull, no spin. Now imagine getting your news like that. Just give it to me straight. ABC News, straightforward.
Another week in America, a country facing a new test now.
The Wuhan airport, almost no one here.
The last flight out of Rome.
This is the nursing home just outside Seattle.
Dozens of people were just rushed off this cruise ship.
This is ground zero.
It is shut down.
Another ambulance just pulled out.
Now they're headed to the hospital.
Time is of the essence.
You can see the ship behind me.
This is the first time tests have been done here.
Morning, afternoon, evening, late night, 24/7. ABC News, there for you.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, free on Apple Podcasts.
And welcome back, everybody. Small businesses have until midnight tonight to apply for loans under the Paycheck Protection Program, of course, a cornerstone of the federal government's coronavirus economic relief plan. But some money is still expected to be left on the table, prompting lawmakers to consider how to repurpose those funds in our still struggling economy. We take a closer look now by the numbers. Nearly 4.8 million loans have been granted to small businesses faced with shutdowns due to the pandemic. That totals more than $518 billion, according to the Small Business Administration. Now, these loans are forgivable if businesses meet certain guidelines, including using 60% of the loan to keep employees on the payroll. The program has been criticized for shutting out some businesses in need and also giving funds to larger chain stores, which prompted that return of $38 billion back to the government. Now, this stimulus program is set to close tonight, still with approximately $134 billion left unused that businesses haven't been able to access for a variety of reasons. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin testified that there's bipartisan support to extend the Paycheck Protection Program and target it to the most hard-hit businesses. He said that he expects legislation by the end of July. And still ahead here on Prime, Beijing's stunning move. The new law is set to be imposed on the citizens of Hong Kong, and why the future of this global financial center is now unclear. Granted bond, the officer charged in the death of Rayshard Brooks will be set free pending trial. The reaction now coming in. And face shields versus masks, which is better and more effective. But first, here's some of the trending stories on abcnews.com.
What you're seeing right now, this is part of the eye wall.
This procession of migrants goes back 2 miles.
There is going to be catastrophic damage.
This fire has made a run. You can see those flames shooting up into the sky.
We are on the jam-packed red carpet.
To the right, guys.
So this is the 4th weekend of protest.
Watch ABC News on location for Facebook Watch.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. So if you like getting behind the biggest news stories of the day, inside all the details, the backstory, and what will happen next, then listen to Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. It's like no other news podcast out there. Even the critics agree. Listen free on Apple Podcasts.
Boy bands.
Nothing was what it seemed.
I was in the biggest band in the world, but I can't even afford my apartment. We had worked so hard. And then I open up the check, and it was
barely minimum wage.
He was robbing them blind.
He's just a miserable person.
Both NSYNC and Backstreet sue because they say they haven't seen any money.
He fled the country.
And it pissed me off.
And we felt duped.
The Hitman, the 2020 event, Friday at 9/8 Central on ABC.
A dire new warning from the nation's top health officials.
I would not be surprised if we go up to 100,000 a day if this does not turn around, and so I am very concerned.
Coronavirus task force member Dr. Anthony Fauci and the head of the CDC, Dr. Robert Redfield, testifying at a Senate hearing, saying the U.S. healthcare system could face serious challenges come fall if COVID-19 and flu activity happen simultaneously. At least 32 states are seeing a rise in cases. Florida now has more than 150,000 reported cases, and 14% of those tested are positive. There's still no federal mask requirement, and many states aren't mandating them either.
The armed couple seen by millions in St. Louis. A prosecutor now investigating Mark and Patricia McCloskey, the husband and wife, both lawyers, waving guns as protesters marched by their home Sunday night. The couple claiming they were terrified when protesters broke down the iron gate to their private street.
It was like the storming of the Bastille. The gate came down and a large crowd of very angry, shouting, aggressive people poured through. I was terrified that we'd be murdered within seconds.
For their part, protesters say they were peaceful.
A judge has temporarily blocked a tell-all book by President Trump's niece after the president's brother filed a lawsuit. The New York State judge ordered that no portion of the book can be distributed until he decides the validity of Robert Trump's claims. The president's brother says Mary Trump had agreed not to publish such a book without permission from the family.
The Trump family celebrated the ruling and called the book truly reprehensible. Mary Trump, though, vowed to appeal. Her attorney said in a statement the book addresses matters of great public concern about a sitting president in an election year and should not be suppressed.
The book had been due out on July 28th.
The military standoff between India and China showing up online. India banning dozens of apps owned by Chinese companies, including the video sharing service TikTok. Koalas will be extinct in part of Australia by 2050 unless immediate action is taken. That, according to a new study that reveals koalas have been ravaged by habitat loss, disease, and the climate. About 5,000 koalas are believed to have died in recent bushfires. And according to the year-long study, logging has also affected the animals' survival.
We turn now to the case of Rayshard Brooks, the 27-year-old black man who was fatally shot by a police officer in Atlanta, Georgia earlier this month. During a police stop, Brooks scuffled with two officers. He grabbed one of their taser guns and then was shot dead by former officer Garrett Rolfe. Rolfe faced a judge today who granted him release on a $500,000 bond with conditions. He's facing felony murder and other charges. And a development in another suspected police-involved death. The police department in Aurora, Colorado is investigating allegations that several officers posed for photographs near the site where Elijah McClain was stopped and held in a chokehold. McClain died days later. Body cam video from last August shows police approaching McClain and then pinning him for several minutes in a neck hold. He later died. And now to Hong Kong, where on the 23rd anniversary of the handover of the former British colony to China, a sweeping new national security law has been put into place that critics say targets Hong Kong's protest movement. So what does it mean for the future of Hong Kong and its relationship with China? ABC News senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell joins us now with all the details. And Ian, just explain how this law came about and what exactly it will change for Hong Kong's residents.
Yeah, well, look, you first of all referenced the original handover from British control. Inside that agreement contained writing that said there had to be national security legislation. And this was continually attempted at introduced in the Hong Kong legislature, but it was always voted down. It didn't go through. So on one level, Beijing is just saying, look, this is something that was always there that we had to enact. But I think for the people of Hong Kong, and particularly the people that we've seen out on the streets, peacefully or otherwise, this is a death knell of their movement and fundamentally changes Hong Kong so that it will no longer look the same in the future.
And so what does this mean for Hong Kong's relationship with mainland China, and how is this being received by pro-democracy advocates and protesters who've resisted China having more control over Hong Kong?
I mean, I think in some senses, this is their worst fears come true. If you imagine that Hong Kong was designed as one country, two systems, many people are now saying, well, this is just going to be one country, one system, China's. This legislation, you start looking at some of the detail, and the detail was only released the very second that the legislation came into force. It has measures in place that would not just outlaw some of the acts that we saw, people out onto the streets against permission by the police authorities, but carrying out some elements of violence that could carry up to life imprisonment, at least a minimum of 5 to 10 years. What their definition of acts of terrorism, people, for example, throwing stones, people blocking traffic, colluding with foreign forces. In other words, if you incite either hatred of Hong Kong or China, or incite sanctions against either of those, that would be defined as colluding with foreign forces. One other final thing, which I think will be most worrying, there is a new department, a new Chinese department now set up to deal with security inside Hong Kong, and the implication is there will be the capacity to draw on Chinese paramilitary or military forces to cross over that border and carry out a crackdown. I think many people feel this is not just the end of the protest movement, but the end of Hong Kong as we know it.
Wow. Okay, Ian, panel, thank you so much for your reporting as always. And now to the practical ways that we can keep ourselves safe from coronavirus. We're seeing more of those face shields being used as a protection against coronavirus. But how do they stack up against masks? Or should you perhaps double up? Our Becky Worley gives us a closer look.
Clear plastic shields. Hospital staff use them in conjunction with surgical masks or N95s, but many people are wearing them instead of cloth masks.
I think face shields are a great option. One great advantage this time of the year is that they aren't as hot as a face mask is. They, for most people, it feels easier to breathe when you have on a face shield. You don't get the fogging that you get with a mask if you're a person like me who wears glasses. And they're easy to clean.
Dr. Michael Edmond, a professor of infectious disease, cites a simulation done in 2014 asserting that wearing a plastic face shield reduced the inhalation of droplets from a cough by 96%, significantly protecting the wearer. This simulation, though, was not conducted using the virus that causes COVID-19, and the CDC says it is not known if face shields protect others from the spray of respiratory particles, and the CDC does not recommend use of face shields for normal everyday activities or as a substitute for cloth face coverings. The CDC's Deputy Director, Ann Shukot, saying,
I don't think we have data yet that a shield is better or worse. In the healthcare setting, I think that issue is it's not just the medical mask or the N95. We actually think in that higher risk setting that eye protection is important.
To confuse matters even more, some states list face shields as an alternative to cloth masks, Oregon listing masks, shields, or coverings as being okay. But in nearby Seattle, the county saying transparent face shields are not a direct substitute for face coverings because they don't protect others. Droplets released when someone coughs, sneezes, or speaks can be dispersed through the sides and bottom of the shield.
We don't have all the data that we need. Really what you would like is a study that head-to-head compares face masks to face shields, and those studies aren't yet available.
Our thanks to Becky for that report. And we turn now to the battle over Confederate symbols that continues to heat up. Tonight, the Republican governor of Mississippi has officially removed the Confederate battle emblem from the state flag, the last one in the nation with that design. And earlier this month, NASCAR banned Confederate flags from its racetrack. Across the country, Confederate monuments have been coming down, some by vandals, which prompted President Trump to order the prosecution of anyone who damages these monuments. Tonight, we are joined by Reverend Robert Lee IV, a pastor, author, and the great-great-great-nephew of Confederate General Robert E. Lee, who's also his namesake. Thank you so much for joining us, Reverend.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start with your reaction to the change of the Mississippi state flag. This was done by a Republican governor and Republican legislature. Did you see this coming, and how does this change the conversation?
Well, if I'm honest with you, I didn't see this happening in my lifetime. This is an incredible opportunity to seek justice, to try and right the wrongs of the past by seeking a redemption and atonement for all of these things that have been wrong. I'm not going to lie, I grew up with the Confederate flag in my bedroom as something that I celebrated the fact that I was related to the man who was the standard bearer for that flag. But as I've grown, I've learned that there is an importance to address what's going on now and to see it for what it is. And that is that white supremacy and racism has been the basis for the celebration of that flag for a long time.
And there are more than 1,700 Confederate symbols in public spaces across this country, including many that honor your ancestor. Should each one of those be removed? And do some belong in a museum?
We have to be willing to contextualize these things one way or another. And for me, personally, I see them as idolatrous. I see them that they have been created into idols of white supremacy and racism, which for many was their original intent based on how they were put up. So for me, this is a no-brainer. This is an issue of justice and of peace. You know, if we want peace in our time and the ability to seek equality and equity for one another, then we must do that by addressing the monuments, not only in stone and in bronze, but elsewhere as well. This is the first domino of many dominoes to fall that could really shape the way we view our future.
The first of many dominoes. I think that you're right. And in the past few weeks, we've, of course, seen vandalism of some of these monuments. Where do you fall on that? Do you agree with the president that people who do that should be prosecuted?
Well, I'm not going to try and pick a fight with the President of the United States. What I am going to say is that the President of the United States should be supporting this conversation instead of hindering it. There is a real sense for us that right now we don't feel the support who are trying to have this conversation in a legal way with people like our president, with people like our state legislatures and state gubernatorial officials. But for me, I'm seeing other people taking extra legal affairs, and that's up to them. But it's all about wanting to be heard. And I think a lot of our communities, a lot of our people in this conversation are not feeling heard.
And let's back up to your childhood. You said just a moment ago that you had a Confederate flag in your bedroom until middle school, and of course you bear your ancestor's name. So what did Robert E. Lee mean to you growing up, and at what point did that change, and what changed it?
Robert E. Lee meant a lot to me. I bear the name, of course, so there was some sense of at least being proud to be a Lee. As I grew, I, of course, had the flag and a picture of Monument Avenue in Richmond and a postcard of him from Arlington House in my bedroom. And that wasn't until about middle school. When I was in confirmation to join the United Methodist Church I was a member of at the time, I had a confirmation member who was this amazing woman of color named Bertha Hamilton. And Bertha Hamilton said, you know, sweetie, I know you're going to be called to ministry. I know that's what you're after and what you want. But if you want to be called to ministry, you can't have that flag in your room. And I felt that day. It was for me a sense of if I want to serve everybody, I can't have a symbol of divisiveness in my room, in my bedroom, a place where I rest my head. I can't have that in there. So for me, this became a personal issue of addressing it not only for my name's sake, but also for the reality that this is about more than just me.
Historians often note, for what it's worth, that Robert E. Lee was a brilliant general. So do you think, considering that, should any part of his legacy be honored? And if so, how would you say he should be remembered?
Well, Lindsay, I look at it this way. The reality is for all of us, we will be judged by the entirety of our actions. Lee, we can give it to him that he was a brilliant tactician, but when the most consequential decision of his lifetime came, whether to secede with his Commonwealth of Virginia and serve as the general there or stay and fight with the United States military, he chose to secede. So to me and to others and anyone who views it with any sense, he became a traitor to the United States. And of course, he was granted citizenship, but that wasn't until President Gerald R. Ford was president. So there was a real sense that he betrayed his country. And if that's something we want to celebrate, then I think we really need to examine our values.
There was a moment in history when he had the opportunity to join the Confederacy or the Union. Any clues in your family tree if he chose the Confederacy because he believed in defending slavery, or was it perhaps out of a loyalty to his Southern roots? And should there be a distinction made when it comes to his legacy?
Look, there's no distinction between fighting for your home state, which was ultimately for the state rights to enslave people. We never finished that sentence, and we were never taught to finish that sentence, even when I was growing up in school. Even if he was fighting for his home state of Virginia, he was fighting for the continued enslavement of black people, and that, to me, is just, that's not something that we can have in our city squares. That's not something we can have on our schools. That's not something we can celebrate.
And lastly, there are so many, as you know, diehards, people who are saying that they do not want their Confederate monuments, statues, flags to be erased or discarded. What do you say to them as a direct descendant of Robert E. Lee?
If I can change, you can too. The burden is on us to address this. And we will be far better off as a country and as a people if we're honest with ourselves. The time for lying about our history is past, and a new cause is upon us.
Reverend Lee, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And still to come, we'll hear from the 11-year-old protester who decided to speak out against police brutality as officers moved in, and remembering a Hollywood icon who left us with a legacy of laughs.
Who was stealing from the biggest boy bands ever?
I was in the biggest band in the world, but I can't even afford my apartment.
He was robbing them blind.
Now, what you don't know, the 2020 event, Friday at 9/8 Central on ABC. Friday nights, 9/8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues, The Hunt, True Crime, 2020. Friday nights, 9/8 Central on ABC.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
ABC News honored winner of 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards, including the most prestigious honor, Overall Excellence in Television. ABC News, America's #1 news choice.
Thank you to the doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals,
and first responders.
Thank you to everyone keeping our supermarkets, pharmacies, gas stations running.
Thank you to all the essential workers for all that you do.
Thank you.
We thank you.
We thank you. We thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
For all you do.
And with every challenge, question, concern, we'll be here for you every day.
Every day.
Every day.
Because we will
get through this together.
Now, with so much on the line, ABC News, America's #1 news, is right there for you live on Hulu with stories of strength, stories of hope. Because now, when it matters most,
Hulu has live news.
Hulu has live news.
Hulu has live news. And that news is ABC News.
ABC News Live on Hulu.
ABC News Live on Hulu.
Watch the news you need.
Thanks so much for streaming with us.
Streaming to all Hulu subscribers right now. ABC News, America's #1 news source. Straightforward news, straight to the heart of the story. ABC News, straightforward.
Another week in America, a country facing a new test now.
The Wuhan airport, almost no one here.
The last flight out of Rome.
This is the nursing home just outside Seattle.
Dozens of people were just rushed off this cruise ship.
This is ground zero.
It is shut down.
Another ambulance just pulled out.
Now they're headed to the hospital.
Time is of the essence.
You can see the ship behind me.
This is the first time tests have been done here.
Morning, afternoon, evening, late night, 24/7. ABC News. There for you.
Welcome back. Tonight, we are remembering a master of comedy. Carl Reiner passed away surrounded by family. He was 98, and the tributes are pouring in for a man that even comic legends say was their idol. Brandy Hitt has more on his remarkable career.
And here he comes now.
Carl Reiner was a real television pioneer. And it was on Sid Caesar's Your Show of Shows where he got his start.
This, Al, is your story.
Back then, he often played the straight man. It was here on early television where his lifelong friendship with Mel Brooks developed.
Well, everybody deducts their wife as an exemption.
Not as an exemption.
Well, as a deduction.
Not as a deduction.
Then what?
As a depreciation.
In 1959, Reiner used his experiences as a comedy writer to create a TV pilot called Head of the Family.
That's where Daddy writes the show.
The network thought he was wrong for the part, and Reiner agreed.
The Dick Van Dyke Show.
With a new star, the show took off. Reiner produced and acted in the show for 6 years alongside Dick Van Dyke.
Mel, let him slice his own bologna.
When the show ended its run, Reiner switched to the big screen.
You could start a war.
Reiner found even more success as a director with films such as Oh God.
I don't do miracles. They're too flashy.
He also directed a series of Steve Martin vehicles, including All of Me and The Jerk.
And I bought a pair. And this is the result.
Reiner had 3 children, and his son Rob followed in his entertainment footsteps.
Mr. Benedict.
Later in life, he returned to acting, appearing as an elderly thief in the Ocean's movies.
We're just supposed to walk out of there with $150 million in cash on us.
He also made dozens of TV appearances like this one on Boston Legal.
I want to be frozen.
In 1995, he won an Emmy for his performance on Mad About You.
Sure, bring your wife. Why don't you bring your mother? Got any kids? No. Oh, what a shame. I was hoping to feed a whole family.
Reiner had impeccable comic timing that reflected his philosophy about writing for comedy. He said, if you imagine yourself as somebody really normal, and if it makes you laugh, it's going to make everybody laugh. For more than half a century, Carl Reiner made us laugh. Brandy Hitt, ABC News, Los Angeles.
And just 2 days ago, Reiner's manager tweeted this photo. The legend alongside his daughter and Mel Brooks sporting Black Lives Matter shirts, taking a stand even in his last moments. Rest in peace. And finally this hour, a young protester who was caught in the middle of a tense scene this weekend in Colorado. Police in riot gear moving in to clear the area from unsafe activity. And the boy who delivered a passionate speech to the officers. Here's our future phenom.
At first blush, Nicholas Elijah Evans may seem like your average kid.
My name is Nicholas Elijah Evans. I'm an 11-year-old who will be attending Highlands Ranch STEM School in August.
He plays football, loves Fortnite, and is an avid TikTok user. But instead of playing games or hanging out with friends this past Saturday, he took to the streets, speaking out against police brutality and serving as an inspiration to others.
I'm 12 years younger than Elijah McClain was when his life was taken by the hands of Aurora police. I didn't understand fully what Black Lives Matter meant until I read Elijah McClain's story. It's not that we are not agreeing that all lives should matter. We are saying that all lives will not matter until Black lives matter too.
As a line of police officers approached, Nicholas held his ground, holding a sign that said, "Walking while black should not equal death."
People look at me, they don't see a black male. Not yet, anyway. Not until I turn around the age of 14, or I'll be perceived as an aggressor versus an aspiring scholar, like I want to be.
When police got too close, Nicholas's mom, Amberly, said it was time to move out.
As soon as I seen the police move while Nick was talking is when I started gathering my family to come back.
Aurora's interim police chief, Vanessa Wilson, defended the use of police in riot gear to clear out the area, saying some members of the crowd threw rocks and water bottles at police or tried to fight officers. Protesters say they're scared of police.
You have citizens that are scared of you, you are paid to protect and serve, and we're scared of you.
But Nicholas didn't let fear stop him. Desperate to share his message, as if his own life depended on it. Our future phenom. And before we go tonight, the image of the day. As the U.S. grapples with its own history, overseas in the Congo today, a statue of the infamous King Leopold II was taken down on the 60th anniversary of the country's independence. The monument was vandalized by protesters calling for all of the king's statues in the nation to be removed. King Leopold II, who ruled the Congo between 1885 to 1908, is known for his cruel reign over the Congo, which led to the deaths of millions of Africans. The current King Philippe issued an apology to the president of the Congo today in honor of the anniversary. And that is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us, and good night.